the magic pill solution has been oversold. You got a problem, take a pill and take 5 pills. Take it for the next week and then you'll be fine. And we all have that kind of in our minds. What can I do to make me feel better right now? Not a long-term, well, you could change your diet, you could do this. That's not as sexy. And plus it's not patentable. So there's not a lot of reason that it would be pushed out there.
It's all in your head. You don't look sick. Your tests are normal. It's probably anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you. Have you heard these words from physicians, family, and friends? If you're someone who has been struggling and swirling through the revolving door of healthcare to find answers about your health, or if you know someone who is going through this experience, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast with Laura Nozicka, a show dedicated to exploring the challenges of living with undiagnosed or rare medical conditions. This podcast explores both sides of the bedside. We will be speaking with patients who have had challenges with finding a diagnosis, along with experts in the field. I'm your host, Laura Nozicka. Please note, I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur, and I am an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Hello, and welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. I am your host, Laura Nozicka, and I'd like to welcome our guest, Audrey Gale. She long dreamed of being a writer, and after 20 plus years in the banking industry, she grew tired of the corporate gamesmanship. I like that term. And pursued her master's in fiction writing at the University of Southern California. Her first novel, a legal thriller entitled The Sausage Maker's Daughters, was published under the name A.G.S. Johnson. However, her second novel, which is what we're here to talk about today, The Human Trial, is the first book in a medical thriller trilogy inspired by her own experiences with the gap between traditional medicine and approaches based on the finding of the great physicist of the 20th century. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and her dog, where she is found hiking through the Santa Monica Mountains. Audrey, thank you so much for being with us today. It's lovely to meet you. I'm really excited to talk with you about all that has informed your new book. Plus, I said, I've never heard of the medical thriller genre, and I'm starting to hear about that more. What got you thinking about medical thriller? So you did I think it was a legal thriller, right? Now medical thriller.
And I would never have thought of myself as a thriller writer. I mean, I'm kind of as surprised as anybody, but I used, I think everybody that writes uses either whatever they've lived or whatever they've imagined or whatever they wish they'd lived. We use these our personal screens kind of help us find our stories. And I come from a family of, there were 5 girls, no boys. My dad was a workaholic, bring home the bacon, traditional dad. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I think that was really the impetus. Once I got out into the world and I was working in corporate America, I was absolutely dumbfounded to find the double standard that we touched on earlier still exists in many ways. I just was shocked by it because I didn't have any personal experience of it. And that sort of set me on a research of the double standards, the biases that we don't even recognize, what's difference between men and women besides the obvious stuff, and how it all works and doesn't work in the world. And so that kind of just propelled me into my first novel. And that theme of our unrecognized biases and unrecognized double standards, differences in standards. That I don't believe I'll ever write anything that doesn't in some way touch on that. I'm very interested in that. And women finding their place in the world and that kind of thing. So that is part of what led into my next book, which is the one we're talking about today, The Human Trial. But the real impetus for that book was my dad. And my experience with my holistic vet who treated my very sick golden retriever when I arrived in Los Angeles. And I couldn't understand what he was doing, but he allowed me to watch everything. And he was doing this kind of magical doctoring. But he was generous about telling me what it was based on, how he came to these practices, who it was based on, so on. And so he saved my dog's life. She lived till she was 16, a happy, full life for 3 more years. Then when my dad was diagnosed with leukemia and refused chemo after one treatment, I said, "I know it's a little crazy, Dad, but why don't you go visit my vet with me?" And he did. He said, "What have I got to lose?" So off we went, and my vet saved my dad's life. He went back to his regular medical doctors after he'd been using this kind of vibrational therapy, I guess would be a easy way of putting it. And they called it the damnedest case of spontaneous remission of cancer they'd ever seen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it was pretty exciting.
What was so I've heard of things like that happening, particularly in cancer, but a few other diseases, but cancer in particular. How did the physicians, I'll say on the Western medicine side of things, how did they react to this idea of spontaneous remission? Because I've heard that some doctors look at it as there's no way it was the treatment is what cured the cancer. It just doesn't happen this way. So what was the conversation or what kind of reactions were you getting?
Well, they knew he wasn't taking treatment, so they couldn't credit that. They knew he had refused treatment and that as far as they knew, he was just allowing himself to die of leukemia. What we
Mm.
couldn't tell was that he had taken the electrical basis of life approach to his disease because my vet would have been arrested and his business would have been closed, and that's illegal.
Right.
And the medical field is very sticky about those kinds of things. So we couldn't tell them. That was a secret that my dad, he died a few years later, 3 or 4, of pneumonia, but that's something he took with him to his grave.
So was he looking for, if we back up a little bit, was he looking for a diagnosis? Was his leukemia hard to diagnose? Had he been dealing with symptoms for a while before he got a diagnosis?
Yeah, I truly actually recall the details of it. I know he went to his doctors. It may have been for a regular checkup. He may have been having some symptoms. I can't really say. I could look back in his file, but his doctors, he came to me and just told me that he'd been diagnosed with leukemia. And I guess most of the time in older patients, cancers grow a little more slowly. So it's not like they give you a day to live. But it was developing.
So had you been with him through that whole process in terms of going to physicians, going to chemo?
No, so we both lived in Los Angeles, but we lived a pretty good way apart. And his doctors were over near his home, but he did come over. I'm not sure where his first chemotherapy treatment was. It might have been at UCLA, but it was somewhere near me. And then he came over so sick. It was so
Mm.
painful to see. He was sick. He was like itchy and he couldn't sit down and he couldn't relax and he couldn't get comfortable. And he was very clear that was it. He wasn't going to do that again.
So we had the one chemo treatment, and what in your mind made him feel that this just is not the right treatment for me?
He was so sick. It made him so sick that he decided, what kind of quality of life will I have if this is what I'm going to treat myself with regularly? It's pointless to live when you feel so miserable and sick. That was his opinion. That was his decision for himself. And, I have to honor that. I have no idea what it feels like to have a chemotherapy treatment, and not would. I hope I never do, but he was, I've never seen him so ill and uncomfortable.
And it's so hard to see parents, especially your dad, because I think like most of us feel like your dad is this strong guy and you expect that
Mhm.
he'll always be like that. And then to see a parent so vulnerable and in pain and not feeling well and not being able to do the things that they've always done, it's so heartbreaking to see.
It is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I'm going through something similar, not cancer, but something similar with my husband right now. He's
Oh,
got a very serious illness, and it is a painful process. It is a painful process, not only to watch, but to go through it as he is.
sure, sure. Well, it's certainly hard in a different way on the spouse or care partner or whatever terminology you prefer to use, but you're going along with him in his illness. And I can't imagine how daunting that could be. I recently interviewed another author who wrote a book about her beautiful story of 10 years of being a caregiver to her husband who had MS. And in this podcast, it certainly isn't just about the person with the illness or the patient, let's say, but it's also about the family and the spouse and the caregiver, care partner, et cetera. So it's difficult, but in a different way, of course, and you're seeing it from a different vantage point. So it's tough. I'm sorry that you're going through that.
Yeah, thank you. Me too.
Yeah. So your dad didn't feel well with the chemo, but what do you think about what it takes to be able to say, this treatment doesn't feel right for me? And how do you get comfortable with seeking the treatment that is the right one for you, that you feel good about? Tell me about how maybe your dad grappled with that and got to the point of accessing a veterinarian to help him move forward in managing his pain and living with leukemia.
I think it's such a personal decision. One of the things that I hope comes from the writing of this book is the thought of your responsibility to be your personal advocate. And it's just what you were asking. It's what feels right for me. What else is there? If this is not working well for me for whatever the reason, what else is out there? And being responsible for finding it. It's certainly not easy, but it can be done. And so my dad was in his mid 80s, so that's one factor. He didn't have forever left. Did he have 5 years? Did he have 10 at the max? Did he have 1? Nobody knew, but his process was, I don't have that much time left, and I am not gonna make myself ill for whatever time I do have left. So that was his way of coming to the conclusion that, sure, I'll go to your vet if you think he's got some kind of painless, non-invasive, cheap, quick, blah, blah, blah approach to disease. What his underlying thought was, what do I have to lose? And so he just happened to be a man with a very open mind. And I think that's required. If you don't believe something's going to work, it probably won't. If you can be open minded like that to a very bizarre sounding approach, which actually has a pretty solid scientific basis, but it's not known. It's not well known at all. So he just had the right mind and it just worked.
That's amazing that he was willing to actually look at other things because there is a generational kind of characteristic. People get older or a little older generation, they're very much about, well, my doctor said, my doctor told me to do this. My doctor said this was the best thing for me. And a lot of people have a hard time going against doctors' advice.
I don't think it's a generational thing. I find that to be true by far. true throughout the population from, from 20s to forever. I think more so in the past than in today, probably. Doctors were really on a pedestal, and they were mini gods, and their word was not questioned.
Hmm.
And I think that's changing over time. Knowledge is as maybe more easily spread by your computer, by your phone, whatever. You can look things up immediately. So maybe that's changing a little bit, but this personal advocacy idea, I find most people do not wish to accept it, because then that implies responsibility. And as long as you can say, well, no, my doctor said, or somebody said, it's somebody else's responsibility. I think that's very fundamental.
Yeah, and I've seen more too, just in my own personal health situation. Not that I have anything terrible going on, but at this point in life, I've been to the doctor plenty of times. But I think doctors are there to present the options, and I think now more of the onus is being put on the patient to make the decision on what's right for them. Hopefully, they have the right amount of information, but they
Mhm.
have to decide what's right for them and do what makes them comfortable and make their own decisions on how they want to live the rest of their life, or just what
Right.
treatment is going to sit well with them as best as possible.
Well, I hope that's exactly what's happening, is that you consult experts for any problem, right? And there's all sorts of specialized doctors for every kind of problem, and specialists in every field, and you consult them. And then you have to make up your mind.
And with a situation like a cancer diagnosis, that, like you said, that's a long haul or a lifelong condition that you're living with in many ways, or at minimum, it's on your mind probably all the time. Whether it's now with what you're experiencing with your husband or what you experienced with your dad, what do you think doctors are missing or overlooking? What's lacking in the relationship between patients and doctors?
Well, I think part of it is educational. There's a bigger question here that I ponder, which is, do our educations open our minds, or do they narrow our minds?
Mhm.
Part of it is educational. The doctors are educated in a certain way that enable them to be licensed and certified and recertified. And there's been very little emphasis until quite recently, I would say, on the more natural ways of, the old fashioned ways of curing various ailments and diseases, not less invasive, maybe natural remedies, maybe, stuff that like Chinese medicine uses herbs and so on. And it can be very effective. I've had a personal experience there that was just mind blowing, but I have an article somewhere on my desk. As you can see, I'm very organized. And
Kind of a creative person is what they say, Audrey.
okay, well, that's me. Yes. Okay. But I had a really interesting article that I copied off of somewhere about Harvard medical students banding together to complain and boycott the influence in their education by the drug companies.
Mm.
Well, I just thought, wow. See, things are changing. That is a big wow to me. That, and I have actually, I have a wonderful article sitting right in front of me by an MD at Harvard who teaches at Harvard, who talked about how the medical profession has been kind of taken over by the drug companies, and how it could be fixed. He didn't just point out a problem, he had a solution. It's brilliant, this article. I think part of it is educational. And I do think, like I've noticed with my own doctors, that they're just getting better at sitting down and finding out who you are, just like us talking today, you know, finding out the whole picture, which has an influence on every aspect of the picture instead of just your rate and your blood pressure and your stats. So I think they're
Yeah.
getting, I don't know if they're being educated that way, but they're getting better at addressing the whole patient.
Right.
But
Right.
they need to
And
keep
if,
getting.
yeah, and if doctors got more time with patients, I think that doctors could
Mhm.
make better recommendations as
I
well.
agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Unfortunately, doctors are bound by productivity numbers, of course, what the insurance companies will or won't pay for. Is there a code available for a particular diagnosis? And if not, well,
Yeah, there's some issues here. There's some big issues
yeah,
here.
there are very big issues. You are correct. You said that something I read here in your bio that you consulted scientists and healing practitioners who use methods largely suppressed by the medical establishment. Tell me about what that research was like and what did you learn?
Well, I started as I was exposed to all of this through my veterinarian. I started with him and just asked, you know, who were these people? When did they do this? What did they find? What was this about? And then he led me in a vicarious or a circuitous route. He led me to the two main scientists who were behind this discovery of the vibrational approach to health. I guess is the best way to put it. If the underlying basis of life is energetic, which is what quantum physics is all about. So I think it's fact.
Is this what
Then
you read?
every as
Is this what you read at night, Audrey, or in the bathtub? Or when do you read these books on quantum physics? Please tell me. I
you have
want
to
to
be a
know.
little driven and crazy. I have a bibliography that I'm going to put in my novel. If this approach, the energetic approach to health and disease, is something you want to learn more about, I have a little bibliography, a partial bibliography. One of the more interesting titles in it is called, I'm looking at it, Quantum Biology. I thought, oh my God, this is really coming. This truth will out.
Sounds like a great
So
beach read, Audrey. The beach read.
yeah. Oh, beach read for sure.
Yeah. For a nerd,
Now,
maybe. For a nerd.
this is my business time reading, I have to say. You have to be a little crazy and a little driven. But I happen to find this incredibly interesting. And since I did see it used successfully twice, I don't know if the universe cursed me with it or blessed me with this knowledge. And I just couldn't let it go. So,
Sounds like
yeah.
it's calling for you.
It does feel a little, pardon the Californianism here, but karmic.
Yeah.
It does.
I get that. I get that. So you mentioned the book. Real quick, Audrey, what's the name of the article that you mentioned that was written by the Harvard professor, Harvard doctor?
Oh, yeah. I have it right here.
We'll put it in the show
His
notes.
name, the doctor is Dr. John Abramson. He teaches at Harvard. He has his undergrad from Harvard and so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. Lots of credentials. And he wrote an article called America's Broken Healthcare Diagnosis and Prescription.
Mm.
And he talked about the fact that we've been overtaken by the large drug companies and they're legitimately interested in maximizing profits. That's what businesses do. That's fine. But then we've kind of lost the oversight, the regulatory aspects of government have been kind of taken over by the drug companies, at least in this article. And they are enormously profitable, enormously profitable. He says something really interesting in this article. He says, the single thing, I'll put it in my own words, the single thing that all parties or both major parties in Washington agree on is the legitimacy of accepting money from the drug companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just at the federal level, that's throughout important state levels, the FDA, there's connections all through what should be our oversight organizations. This article does have a solution, and I just found it just blew me away. Just blew me away that a doctor has this insight, as did the students at Harvard. Harvard is a hotbed of info. And actually, my novel doesn't exactly open in Harvard, but it gets there very quickly. And that's where my main character, Dr. Randall Archer, gets his education, his undergrad, his medical degree, and his specialization are all at Harvard.
Mm.
So I brought that in. I brought that in as well.
What else informed your book?
So I have two friends that I relied on initially to help me understand both pathology and medicine. So I have a pathologist friend who let me come to his labs and look through his microscopes and talk to me about his process and what they do and how they use, specimen slides and slides of various kinds and so forth. And that was super interesting. And especially because I kept telling both of them, it's my job to put this into English that people can understand. And frankly, neither one of you is very good at that. So we have to work at it. And then the other one was a very decorated, I should say, physicist. His PhD in physics is in space physics. And that has a lot to do with identifying elements at billions of miles away by the spectrum that they can measure their light signature. Again, vibrating energy helps them determine what elements are in that planet or star or whatever they're looking at. So he helped me with the physics end of it. And it was really more quantum physics that we kind of got into, the energetic basis of life, that then related more closely to medicine. I actually had an intern who was married to a physicist, and of course, I talked to everybody, so I'm picking everyone's brain I can possibly.
Yeah.
And I said, if in the 20th century, physicists proved that there is nothing really solid in the universe. It's our perceptions that see solid, but it's all a bunch of empty space with clumps of this energy that, as it forms and comes together, forms different elements and forms our perception of different things, which, by the way, is in the movie Oppenheimer. I hope you go see it. It was exactly explained that way in Oppenheimer. And how come if it's been proven, if you accept modern physics, why isn't medicine ever using any of that? And so my internist, who was married to a physicist, said, well, my husband says it's just really too complicated. It's just too complicated. I thought, well, I don't like that answer. I don't like that answer. There has to be a way of us coming to, maybe this is another problem. The specializations that we have in our training and our education prevents us from seeing how they might interact and how they inform each other. Lots of big issues have come up for me in this book, and that's another one of them.
Try to explain that to anyone. It's such a esoteric idea to try to wrap your brain around when you can touch and feel everything. But certainly an interesting concept to think about, and it's not a far-fetched concept at all. It exists, but trying to explain it. So I think your friend is probably right. It's just too complicated. It's too hard to explain. And then how do you use it in some kind of practical way? What do you do with it?
Well, that's exactly what the whole entire novel goes through. It takes the journey of a physicist who is very driven, trying to prove himself, and a little insecure and somewhat afraid, as he's determined to have a great career as a medical pathologist, and how his work with his laboratory partner, who is developing the means to see this underlying energy more and understand it more and more, how that their original collaboration has taken him to a far left turn in medicine, and how conflicted he is, because all he ever really wanted was to be an MD, a revered and successful MD. And yet his research is putting him at odds with the medical establishment. It's that dynamic that kind of carries the story, and his conflicts and the consequences of his research.
Has any of, you and your thoughts and feelings or personality coming through some of that character, maybe some of the other characters in the book?
Well, yes, I'm probably all over the place, but it's not my personal story. It's not my personal story, but it was so fascinating for me to read about the original discoverers, scientists, and to realize the price they paid for their science, which it's rumored, and there's probably some merit to it, that they were both murdered. And the reason I think there's merit to it is because one of them was exhumed years after his death. So there had to be a reason for that exhumation. Anyway, never proven, so who knows?
Which scientists are you referring to?
The scientists who discovered what I've written about in this book, the scientists who discovered the energetic, how to use the energetic basis of life in treating disease. Highly successfully. I mean, they had a very small human trial, which is the title of my book, based on that human trial. But they were 100% successful when they could match the energetic vibration of the disease and recreate it. They could use it to cure it. And that's what the book is about. And I believe it's laid out in small enough steps that readers will understand.
Mm-hmm. And this takes place in what time period?
The novel is set in the 1930s, and they worked in that period a little before, a little after. But what I liked about the 30s, just sticking to the 30s, was it starts with the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes through Roosevelt and the New Deal. A lot of chaos in the country and the world at that point, as Hitler's coming to power in Germany, Stalin's coming to power in Russia, and we're all heading for a world war. So really liked the background conflict to tell the story.
Mm-hmm. So you had to do a lot of just historical research as well, in terms of what was going on during that time period.
Absolutely. And I divided into years in the 30s, and, the New Deal is one title, the second New Deal, the Depression, and so on and so forth. It is set accurately against the actual history of the time, because that is my other fascination. In fact, I would say my primary fascination is the stories, the historical truth of our lives.
And so with all of this experience, again, with your dad and your dog, and now you're with some personal experience that you're going through with your husband, why a medical thriller and not just maybe a nonfiction kind of memoir of this journey?
I don't think of myself as that interesting.
Oh, I beg to differ.
I mean, well, thank you. I like your opinion a lot, but it's because I really wanted to explore the science I had seen in action, that it was an apparent cure for leukemia, was an apparent cure for whatever was wrong with my dog, which was some form of cancer. And I just wanted to explore options out there that might be quick and fast and cheap and available and non-invasive and not offering you an added month to your life or an added year, but offering you a second chance at life. It just seems, if this, I have seen this with my eyes, there has to be something to it. So that's why I wanted to delve into it. And I really have I don't have a memoir in me. Maybe someday, but I don't see myself writing that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, obviously, you are a very creative lady I don't even know what it's like to come up with a story, but it's backed in so much research, to have to take the time and the steps to go through the research and, even though it's fiction, to make sure though that it's accurate just from a time period standpoint and have all the dots connect, I think is a pretty amazing accomplishment and makes you interesting. I don't care what anybody says. I think that makes you more than interesting. You're like an expert on some physics now. So if I have any questions, I'm coming to you, Audrey.
Okay, that'd be great.
On quantum physics and pathology. Let's not forget about that.
That I think all stories come from researching an idea, even if it's just researching it in your head. Besides, I did spend time at libraries. I spent time with experts. I spent time in medical labs. But even my first book, which was an exploration of the 60s, the radical 60s. And that was more, I still had to go, I had to go to the university I was writing about. I had, there's just a ton of research. And then that just keeps building the story. At least that's my personal experience. The story kind of builds from what you learn and read and think, and it just keeps building till you have a novel of, 300 pages.
What would you advise someone who was given a recommendation for treatment, if we go back to your dad or any other current experiences you're having? If somebody gets a diagnosis, they're given a treatment plan by the physician, something doesn't sit right with them, how would you encourage someone to be curious and to question, is this the only option?
Right. Well, first of all, they have to know it's not the only option. That just doesn't exist. There are options. And the second thing is, I believe we're all coming to a place of deeper respect for our bodies. There's such complexity here that if we could just get out of the way of our immune system, we would probably feel better almost immediately. Now, there's a billion ways of doing that, and you can look it up. I have used pretty rigorous cleanses in the past. And the difference before and after is astonishing. I wasn't doing this for disease. I was just doing this for health. But to get out of the way of your immune system, and that means all those basic things that we know about health, which is, exercise, diet, enough water, emotional happiness, curiosity, involvement with people and life. All those things that make us healthy would be a good starting point. And then, it's easy today. You get on Google and you Google alternatives to chemotherapy or, whatever is on your mind. It's easy today. Not a lot of people have to go to libraries anymore. I still do, but, and there are specializations that will require you to go to libraries, but there's a lot of resources today that after you focus on making sure your immune system is at optimum, then see what else is out there, see what the options are.
Yeah. Of course, the option is always do something or do nothing. at a high level. Those are your options, but is the do something the right thing? Audrey, tell us when your book is going to be launching and where folks will be able to get to it.
The launch date for The Human Trial by Audrey Gale is September 26th. And by that time, it will be available online and in bookstores. I hope widely in bookstores, certainly orderable in bookstores. But anyway, it'll be available wherever you buy books on the 26th.
And you said online, so that means Amazon?
It's all those. Yeah. Amazon for sure. They're the big gorilla in the publishing world these days. Amazon. I assume Barnes and Noble and Target and all those people are kind of getting in the act, and it will be available to all of them. So it will be available.
Well, congratulations on the book, Audrey. I'm excited to read it and get into this new genre of medical thriller, which I had no idea. I'm excited to learn more about it and learn about this scientist who's having this struggle between his theories and the medical establishment, as you said, and some of the other characters in the book. So thank you so much for being with me today and telling us more all about you and your background. And other than the book, Audrey, what would you say the silver lining is across your experiences with your dad and your dog and maybe what you're going through now with your husband? Are there any?
Yeah. Yes. The silver lining is it's focused me in a way I never anticipated my life would go. And it's been very rewarding digging into all of that. And I got to help my dad, which is one of the most important people that will ever live in my life. And that was incredibly gratifying. And he just makes me admire him so much because he was so open-minded about it. And the bottom line for me with this book was I always hoped that it would do two things. It would open minds to your own responsibility and to the options, your own advocacy, and somebody positioned in maybe the world of medicine or maybe the world of physics. I hope somebody really smart out there in one of those positions can pick up the science and bring it to the fore.
Yeah, bring it into terms that people understand, ways that it would be applicable for medicine at large. Yeah. Terrific. Well, again, good luck with the book. And I'll be excited to hear more about the big launch coming up really soon. So thanks again for being with us today, Audrey.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it, Laura. And I do admire your podcast. I think long overdue.
Well, thank you. Well, hopefully you will get to listen in and there's more to come. I'm excited with this journey that seems to be a calling for me as your books and your research were for you. And I'm fortunate and grateful to still be here to be able to do it. So thank you.
Yeah. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care and be well, everyone. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, me, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com.